We view growth as something positive. It's great watching our kids grow up or seeing a tree grow. Yet we are always aware that all growth must come to an end. There's a limit. Nature knows no such thing as infinite growth. This rule seems to apply to every kind of growth but one. Economic growth is somehow supposed to continue indefinitely.
We believed then and now there are no limits to growth and human progress when men and women are free to follow their dreams. And we were right.
If that growth fails to materialize, we panic. But why? As one person recognized 150 years ago, growth is the fundamental principle of our economic system. Capitalism only works when the economy grows. But Karl Marx recognized something else as well. It is this growth that will eventually destroy the system itself. And today, have we reached that point? Is the system about to collapse? Or might infinite growth actually be possible?
The governments don't want us to even question the G word. They don't even want to put a discussion around growth. If you were looking at this from the outside, an alien arriving from outer space, and you're looking at this society, you would really wonder what was going on. What are they doing? What is this growth that has to appear in every political sentence and is the basis of every economics textbook? What is it all about? Is it a religion that they have? Is it a god that they're chasing? Is it a virus that's taken over them? And what is this visceral fear that emerges as soon as growth starts to go away?
Eine Gesellschaft ohne Wachstum kann es gar nicht geben, weil die Bedürfnisse der Menschen, die ja weit übers Materielle hinausgehen, jeden Tag Wachstum entstehen lassen.
Portugal, Wirtschaftswachstum, starkes Wirtschaftswachstum in Spanien, ein ziemlich einzigartiges Wirtschaftswachstum in Europa.
Und deswegen, glaube ich, ist die Politik fasziniert von der Wachstumsdebatte, weil man dort einen Begriff hat, mit dem sich Politik schmücken kann und gleichzeitig Zustimmung beim Wähler und bei der Bevölkerung bekommt. Solange es Menschen auf diesem Planeten gibt, die Bedürfnisse haben, wird es Wachstum geben. Ich halte das für ähnlich unabänderbar wie die Schwerkraft.
Where does this unshakable belief in economic growth come from? Has it always been there? Is it really part of human nature?
It was through audacious and imaginative use of mass production methods that U.S. industry was able to perform its wartime miracles, to build more planes than all the United Nations put together, to turn out ships at the rate of 200 a month, ships which carried overseas the armed might of the United States to decide the outcome of a war.
The success story of economic growth began during World War II. Mass production of tanks and aircraft led the American economy out of crisis. The output of military equipment was now calculated by a new statistical measure, gross domestic product, or GDP. If production, i.e. GDP, grew, then so did prosperity. Americans believed so firmly in this new formula that they compelled their allies to bring their economic policies in line with it. From then on, it wasn't people's incomes that counted, it was only growth.
And it turned out to be such a useful measure, actually, for the war effort and for understanding the war effort, that afterwards it became the single most important policy number across the world it kind of symbolizes progress to us. It sort of says, wow, things are getting bigger, so they must be getting better. That was the birth of the GDP.
In the 3 decades after the war, the Western economies grew up to 8% annually. In the US, they called it the golden age of capitalism. In France, they were the 30 glorious years. In Germany, it was the economic miracle. An entire generation enjoyed material prosperity and full employment, and this became engraved in the collective consciousness. Even though these high growth rates were only made possible by massive wartime destruction, the belief in growth was now unstoppable. GDP became the most important benchmark in history.
And the economy and the growth of the economy was doing a good job for us when we were young, if you like, when as an economy, as a society, we were young. And one of the really important things to say is that there are some societies where that is still necessary, where you still need that growth, where you still need food, clothing, and shelter, where there are very, very poor, undernourished people living on less than the price of a skinny latte from the cafe downstairs. And that's a situation where growth makes some sense. But the idea that as human beings, all we want ever is more and more stuff doesn't really stack up. So after a certain point, you have to ask yourself, well, how much is enough? How much more do I need to grow the economy to satisfy human appetites?
The 1970s saw growth rates sink for the first time due to the oil crisis and other factors. The boom was over, the market saturated. Western economies stagnated. Millions suddenly found themselves unemployed. It was uncharted territory. For the first time, the limits of growth became visible, economically, socially, and ecologically.
We do have some understanding about growth.
In 1972, a group of scholars commissioned by the Club of Rome presented a report in Washington entitled The Limits to Growth. Using a computer simulation, researchers at MIT had calculated for the first time what continuous economic growth would do to the planet. Their findings set off alarm bells around the world.
When resource consumption is doubling every 20 years,
for the first time, people were confronted with the fact that economic growth could also have negative consequences, and that the planet's natural limits would soon be reached. The success story of growth was in crisis.
We've reached levels of prosperity which carry the seeds of disruption and necessitate a complete relook at the whole world's social, political, and other situations.
The Club of Rome report sold 30 million copies and became a global sensation. And yet, soon the scholars themselves came under attack. Their calculations were decried as irresponsible fear-mongering, because it's impossible to admit the unacceptable. The success story of growth must continue. Unfortunately, many of the scholars' predictions turned out to be right, and in many cases, reality even surpassed their bleak predictions. As the Club of Rome report was causing an international uproar, the Brazilian rainforests in the Amazon basin were still nearly untouched. The huge Brazilian state of Mato Grosso, largely populated by indigenous people, consisted of forest and savanna. Today, not much of that is left. Since the mid-80s, progress, aided by international investors, has been eating away at the rainforest. 35 football fields of forest disappear every minute. It's been the same story over and over again. Lumberjacks move in first, then cattle breeders, and finally the soybean barons.
Eles comem alguma coisa que tem, às vezes, milho no meio ali, ó. Essa região era uma região que não existia nada, praticamente, né? Ela foi aberta pelos governos brasileiros, integrar para não entregar, eles falavam assim. E aí, então, foi aberta essas áreas na época e hoje, dentro da fazenda aqui, tem de 24% a 25% de reserva. Né? Ter essas áreas produtivas, plantando soja, plantando milho, alimentando o mundo aí. Nós tornamos o nosso município aqui a capital nacional do agronegócio. É um marco que a gente quer preservar e cada ano que passa procurar todas essas tecnologias em benefício do ser humano e cada vez produzir mais. E hoje, em termos de avião agrícola, é um dos melhores, né? Esse avião aqui é 1.800 litros de calda. Isso aqui é glifosato. Aqui é da Basso, né? Faz duo. Isso aqui é inseticida. Inseticida. Aí tem os fungicidas, né? Na terça-feira, se não me engano, veio o pessoal da BASF. Algo já pesquisando para ser melhor disso que está no mercado hoje, né? Para você ter uma eficiência melhor e ter uma rentabilidade maior, né?
The tropical climate delivers 3 to 4 harvests per year and with it massive profits. Soy and corn for export and animal feed. Highway 163 is the gateway to the Amazon basin. It brought lumberjacks, money and destruction into the forest. Today, countless trucks line the agribusiness highway, transporting their valuable cargo to the international ports. They pass an endless sea of soybean fields, enormous silos and slaughterhouses through one of the largest boom regions in the world. Growth rates of up to 20%. Big business.
In the 70s, this region, it was just populated by Indians. It's just amazing forest. 34 years just of colonization, and it's the most important region in agribusiness of the country. It's the right place to make new investments, to make money. Here is the most important and biggest feedlots in this state of Mato Grosso. The cattle, a good part, is exported to Russia, China, and other countries. Here we work, it's just classify the animals. Cattle goes to the JBS, the most biggest meat industry in the world.
Do you see any limits?
No. Next 10 years with the technologies, what can I say? There is no limits. The limits, probably the sky, the heaven, the limits.
In response to the crisis of the 70s, economic policy underwent a change of course. New growth had to be found, no matter what the cost, even if that meant unleashing the primal forces of finance capitalism. These had been contained after World War II because they were held responsible for the Great Depression and the war itself. Monetarism was the new magic word.
And monetarism was the idea that if you put more money into the economy, liquidity it was called, that additional money in the economy would help real investment, that would help give us more production, it would allow us to consume more goods, and we would get growth back again. So this little hiatus, if you like, in the 70s, primarily caused by the oil crisis, led to a a transformation in the economics of our societies, and in particular how we think about growth and how we think about stimulating growth.
Governments deregulated financial markets. Banks, insurance companies, and investment funds gained in influence and were now allowed to gamble with currencies, stocks, even with people's retirement funds. Capital was let loose, and the financial sector was flooded with money. It was a pact with the devil, and the beginning of a slow process of self-disempowerment. In exchange for growth, governments relinquished their power to financial markets. But who do we mean by financial markets and capital? And what does it all have to do with us?
We could give the go to extend latches, I believe, yes.
The Allianz Group is Europe's biggest insurance conglomerate and one of the biggest players in the global financial markets.
Ich bin verantwortlich für 600 Milliarden Euro, davon 500 Milliarden für die Lebensversicherung und etwa 100 Milliarden für die Sachversicherung. In der Lebensversicherung legen wir die Altersvorsorge unserer Kunden langfristig und sicher an. Man kann sich das so vorstellen, dass wir zum Beispiel auf Regionen schauen, welche Regionen wachsen aktuell, wo finden sich attraktive Möglichkeiten, an diesem Wachstum zu partizipieren, zum Beispiel über Aktieninvestments, aber auch Investitionen in Immobilien, in Infrastrukturinvestments, in Autobahnen und natürlich auch in normale Kredite.
If we summarize this moderate positive growth in China, therefore also in Asia overall, some kind of moderate growth, and in the developed markets in Europe and U.S., there are also no new growth drivers to be seen.
Unsere Kunden erwarten aktuell von uns etwa 4% Rendite. Um diese 4% zu erreichen, müssen wir in sogenannte investive Bereiche investieren, also Aktien, Immobilien etc. Also wir werden in der Zukunft weniger in Europa anlegen, wir werden mehr in den Schwellenländern anlegen, denn höheres Wachstum in diesen Ländern ermöglicht höhere Anlagerenditen. Eine Welt, ein wirtschaftliches System ohne Wachstum ist nicht möglich. Stillstand bedeutet Rückschritt und Rückschritt bedeutet Einbußen im Wohlstand. Nein, also ich möchte mir eine Welt ohne Wachstum nicht vorstellen. Denken Sie an die 70er, 80er, 90er Jahre, wo man sich wirklich Gedanken gemacht hat, ob das Wachstum ökologisch verkraftbar ist. Und ich denke, heute sieht man eindeutig, ja, es ist ökologisch verkraftbar.
The money of millions of insured individuals is sent on its way to multiply. When Andreas Gruber's team has a rough idea to which countries and sectors the billions should flow, they hire an asset manager. He determines what stocks or bonds to invest in.
Most of our clients are institutions. What they want is they want their money invested in the capital markets. Our customers expect their capital to be returned. They want their money back, and they want a return on that capital. And the more growth there is, the higher the return. Worldwide, PIMCO manages 1.2 trillion euros of assets, and in Germany we're managing 480 billion euros of assets. So the financial markets, they have a social role in distributing people's savings towards investment. And that investment is usually a form of debt. So when you take out a loan, for example, to buy a house, that loan could end up in a bond, and we could end up buying that bond. So growth is important so that individuals and companies who borrow money in the capital markets can actually pay those loans back.
No, that's pre-trade. Yeah, but you wouldn't say 20 pips, wouldn't you?
Imagine a world with zero growth. That's a world in which pretty much everything gets frozen. If you haven't got a job in this new world with no growth, bad luck. You're going to have to wait for somebody to retire before maybe you get their job. A society without growth probably won't work at all. Not for long. It will degenerate into collapse.
Without growth, societies will descend into chaos, according to the financial and political elite. But is that really the case? Isn't it rather their blind faith in growth that leads us to chaos? In the 80s, the world of finance, operating from the City of London and Wall Street, increased its influence on governments and societies and became the driving force of capitalism. Today, financial markets, not governments, determine the well-being of entire countries. How did it come to this? How could financial markets gain such influence over our lives? One person who knows the financial world better than almost anyone is Stuart Cowley. For nearly 30 years, he was a successful fund manager on Wall Street and in the City of London.
No, I never planned to be a fund manager. I was a scientist and had been offered £20,000 to go and start on Wall Street in 1987. And that was the Wild West. That was the beginning of it, really. And we went into the new era of Reagan, Thatcher, and liberal trade. The so-called Big Bang in the city was all about financial deregulation. Let's go. Let the market decide, and let's hire people, and let's see what happens. Yes? As opposed to this really kind of controlled atmosphere which we'd had before. And it was that we walked into, where money now talks. Now money wins. And you need people, smart people, to trade the markets and make finance the powerhouse behind capitalism, which is it's supposed to be.
The plan seemed to work. Stock markets boomed. Growth no longer needed to be financed by increasing wages and tax revenue. Now it was all about credit. Governments and individuals were to take out loans from banks and investors so that they could be good consumers and thus generate growth.
Credit cards come along, overdraft facilities, lending for houses becomes widely available. And it's at that point that it explodes. That now it's not just the very wealthy who have access to all these things, consumerism. It's now people lower down the income scales as well. And if you look at money supply and the supply of credit in the early 80s, it just explodes. And it's been access to consumerism and kind of promotion of current consumerism, plus debt, which has created the growth and created where we are today.
The cold logic of the market took over, producing winners and losers. One of the people who knew best how to profit from this new logic was Donald Trump.
I really think I have an instinct, but I don't think it's the instinct of a shark. I think it's the instinct of maybe getting what I want or knowing how to get what I want.
Only a few recognized the profit opportunities in this new era, as well as Donald Trump. He made large-scale purchases of derelict New York apartment blocks and promised to transform them into luxury hotels and apartments. He received financing from banks high on the market boom and through the largest tax break in New York City history. Trump himself paid practically nothing.
Manhattan is an incredible place where you build a huge building and it's sold out in a matter of days. I mean, you build a building with literally 300 or 400 units. I'm building a building, it's one of the hottest buildings anyone's ever seen. It's just selling like hotcakes. Manhattan itself is becoming a place of the rich, period.
Where are your limits, Mr. Trump?
Well, I don't know what my limits are, but I know that when I reach my limits, I hope I'm going to be able to know that at that point.
The genie was out of the bottle. The brave new world of financial capitalism could no longer be constrained, and great efforts were made to sell it as a controllable and secure system.
The whole industry is based around a kind of an illusion, and the illusion of certainty. There is a vested interest, if you like, inside of the system as it is, to project knowledge, and extra knowledge. But they really don't have any more knowledge than probably you do.
The Bloomberg company from New York plays a central role in the financial system. Since the 1980s, Bloomberg has provided stock traders and bankers with lightning-fast price fluctuations and finance data from around the globe, making it one of the world's most influential media companies. Around the clock, Bloomberg's news agency and stock market channel broadcast the glad tidings of the free market.
Our role in financial markets is as a provider of transparency. We provide a huge amount of data, huge amount of numbers on markets, on economies, on companies, providing a chronicle of capitalism, telling the story of money is vitally important to Bloomberg and central to what Bloomberg does. We're trying to make a real-world feel for people so that they understand what's happened and why it's happened and what may happen next. Economic growth data is one of the most important numbers we look for. It provides a football score on the state of an economy. Steady, solid growth in financial markets is usually reflected in solid, sustainable growth in economics, in demand, in jobs markets. The reason is that people feel wealthier. If you look at the textbooks, there should be no limits to growth. But if you look in the newspapers at the moment, you get the feeling there is a break on growth. The central question now is whether we're in a cyclical slump or whether something structural is going on.
Lower, biggest drop since 2008.
And do you have a personal opinion on that?
I don't have a personal opinion. I'm a journalist. I do, but I'm not going to share it. So the history of the world would suggest that man actually usually gets it right quite a lot of the time, that when backs are put against the wall, those entrepreneurs, those investors who have smart ideas can actually flourish. Yes, the world can reinvent itself. It has done so multiple times in history. You can usually bet on the human being to find a better future.
All these information systems empires are based upon people remaining to have confidence in the information that they're giving out and the promotion of the ideology and the narrative which finance is based around, which has increasingly become this kind of game show approach to things. For a period of time, everybody wins. And then, as you know, a number of economists, Marx, Keynes have pointed out, is eventually all these manias go up a lot and then they crash down.
So there was heavy lobbying by the financial sector on the government to ensure actually that this financial sector growth could continue. And governments believed that it was in the interest of the economy because everyone told them, monetarism told them, that if you had all this liquidity in the system, then you must be growing your real economy. But actually what was happening within that system rather was that you'd freed up all this money, which was then used to bet on the increases in the value of certain companies and certain shares and of money itself in the system. And the people who were doing that betting were not only profiting from it, but they were also the only people who were regulating the system. So it created a huge, unstable and incredibly unequal system in which the rich got very much richer really very fast.
For decades, society has been transformed into an enormous market to which there's allegedly no alternative. The huge sums earned by a few in the financial markets scream for high returns and have penetrated every corner of the globe. New ways are constantly sought to expand profits already in the trillions. The world seems to be getting too small for all the capital.
When I was a kid, I couldn't afford to fly in an aeroplane. I actually joined the air transport industry before I ever flew in an aeroplane. Today, people take flying for granted. It shaped the way we buy goods. It shaped the places people go to. It shaped the meetings between people and different cultures. Over the next 20 years, we expect the world to need 32,000 new civil aircraft. At the moment, around 1 billion of the people who live on our planet fly by air regularly. The remaining 6 billion don't yet fly by air. And it's these people who will be tomorrow's passengers and tomorrow's customers, in addition for those of us in developed countries who take flying for granted. Clearly, this means that the biggest scope for growth is where the people are and where the economic wealth is, the disposable incomes are.
We have delivered over the last 6 years more than 100 brand new airplanes to the airlines in China. One airplane every 3 days. The change is spectacular.
An总，你这一来，这是灵气全都带动了。
没有，我们人无养武。330好像在中国要也是在这儿要组装，照张相吧。来，陈总，你给我们也算一个那个。
Well, currently we have slightly more than 200 airports in China in total. And every year, in the range of 10 or 15 new airports will be built. Imagine if everybody can afford the travel expenses, even a peasant with low-cost business model, a worker is willing to travel by air. The market is fantastic. You can't imagine. And I already seen the sign of that. That's why when I look at, every time I'm asked about the perspectives of the market, I cannot measure the dimension of this market when I have the reference of 1.4 billion, which is even more important than the whole of Europe.
But more air traffic means more pollution. What do you do about that?
We made every single effort to try to reduce the emissions. But if we look at the social benefits, at the economic benefits the aviation industry bring to the humanity, and then people may think differently. We are trying to make the world smaller and smaller, to make it a real village.
For decades, growth was kept on life support, with debt. Only a few had the courage to say that the party couldn't go on forever, but no one listened to them. In September 2008, the time had come. The House of Cards collapsed.
It's a Black Monday for the American capital market. Despite dramatic rescue efforts over the weekend, all efforts to keep the world's fourth largest investment bank alive have failed. Lehman Brothers is shutting its doors for good.
It's also, I think, a necessary part of the cleanup process. Lehman, we knew was weak. We expected it to go. It's not going in the way that people expected it to, but it's gone.
In the long run, I'm confident that our capital markets are flexible and resilient and can deal with these adjustments.
Just tell us how you're feeling. It's awful, I know, but...
It sucks.
But did you see it coming at all?
No, I didn't.
There was a deep shock in the system. There was a sense of, my goodness, we can't let this happen again. Governments have to have a better handle on this system, and for a while, there were attempts to do that. It lasted probably a matter of a few months. In fact, by the end of 2009 and into 2010, the very same companies that had been responsible for some of that disaster were still engaging in those same kinds of risky trading procedures that for a while had been stopped in the wake of the crisis. And we learned the lesson, but then we forgot it again.
The financial crisis was a huge opportunity for governments to free the world from its dependency on financial markets and to change the system. But they wasted it. Instead, they did all they could to revive the old system, spending trillions of dollars to save the banks. Then something incredible happened. The banking crisis miraculously became a sovereign debt crisis. Private debt became public debt. Governments and their citizens were subjected to austerity policies under which millions of people suffer to this day. Banks and stock markets, however, were keen to demonstrate a sense of normalcy as soon as possible. In reality, nothing is as it seems. Capitalism survived the crisis, but no longer functions like it once did.
Even though it's not as busy as it used to be, this is still the center of capitalism. You could look at all the tourists who are outside the building taking pictures. They all still believe this is the center of capitalism. It's a symbol of something. It means something to them.
I'm sort of like the weatherman for the stock market. I come in every day and try to figure out what's going on in the stock market. I talk to trading desks, I talk to analysts, I talk to people who know a lot about the stock market, and I go on the air and on the internet and explain what's going on. So every day I come in and try to figure out which way the wind is blowing on Wall Street.
Famous celebrity. So remember, the S&P 500, though, is down 1.5% this month. We have very clear market leaders, and the reason we've had it is because better prospects for earnings in the fourth quarter. Remember what the market leaders have been? Energy, tech, and banks. Lagging today, energy, techs, and banks. That's interesting. Thanks, guys. Nancy, how you doing?
Hey, Bob, let me just change your battery.
You can't come up and say, well, the markets are just drifting around. There is no real meaning of anything that's happening today. Back to you, Sue. That won't make any sense. Nobody's going to be interested in that. Human beings want stories. They don't want an endless list of numbers. Nobody's impressed with a list of numbers. They want to know what's going on. Tell us in plain English what the markets are doing. And that's the real skill set. And often that's not easy because things are very complicated. People have always claimed that capitalism can be evil and capitalism doesn't help people. I completely disagree. What I see in the last 150 years is millions of people have been lifted out of poverty. I personally am a true believer and still believe that the system works well, and I'm committed to that system.
Als ich angefangen habe in der New Yorker Börse, waren wir schon etwa 5000 Menschen auf dem Parkett. Geld steht immer noch im Mittelpunkt, aber die Menschen sind im Zuge der Technologisierung fast vollends verschwunden. Wir sind statt 5000 jetzt nur noch ein paar hundert. Sicherlich die Fassade nach außen ist immer noch die New York Stock Exchange und das sieht alles sehr ehrwürdig aus und das ist furchtbar wichtig. Aber im Prinzip sind es jetzt die Maschinen, die das Rennen machen bei uns. Früher sind die Aktienkurse deshalb gestiegen, weil Unternehmen mehr Gewinne erwirtschaftet haben. Wenn die Gewinne eines Unternehmens steigen, weil dann steigen eben auch die Aktienkurse. Ich glaube, das kann man nachvollziehen und da haben wir immer noch auch die Verbindung zwischen realer Wirtschaft und Börse. Wir haben in den USA seit langer Zeit bei den großen Konzernen überhaupt kein Ertragswachstum. Im Gegenteil, die Gewinne sinken, trotzdem steigen die Börsenkurse. Der Aktienmarkt bläst sich immer weiter auf und koppelt sich von der echten Wirtschaft, von der Realität ab. Die Tatsache, dass hier Dinge passieren, die wir alle noch nicht erlebt haben, bei denen wir deshalb vielleicht auch nicht wissen, wie wir damit umgehen müssen, wenn der Schuss mal nach hinten losgeht, das sorgt zweifelsohne auch bei meinen Kollegen auf dem Parkett, wie auch bei mir, für eine gehörige Portion Angst.
I think what we've seen over the last few years is cracks in the shiny surface of capitalism. And at first that's what they look like. You know, they just look as though something not quite right on the way the light reflects off it. And as you look more and more closely, you see that these cracks go right to the heart of the model. They go right to the heart of the basic ideas of capitalism.
Does capitalism still work? Can the system deliver what it promises? Providing growth, jobs, and prosperity for all?
Wir haben bei uns als Vision die Smart Factory. Unser Ziel ist es, dass wir eine vernetzte Produktion haben, die in sich miteinander kommunizieren kann und sich selber optimiert. Natürlich ist es unser Ziel, dass wir bei gleicher installierter Kapazität, die wir haben, mit den gleichen Ressourcen mehr aus unseren Anlagen bringen. Wenn wir nicht wachsen und wenn wir nicht profitabel sind und unsere Arbeitsplätze nicht sichern, dann werden das andere tun. Andere werden es auf jeden Fall tun, ja, an der Stelle. Und das ist auch ein Naturgesetz. Wachstum ist ein Naturgesetz. Und dem Naturgesetz können wir uns nicht verschließen.
Ever since the Industrial Revolution, machines have been replacing human labor, thereby causing great societal upheavals. But until recently, they had only replaced the physical labor of humans. Now machines are capable of doing what makes us humans unique. They are able to think. It's a completely new chapter in human history, which will have massive consequences on how we live and work.
Can technology think? Watson can. IBM Watson is a technology unlike any that's come before. Because rather than force humans to think like a computer, Watson interacts with humans on human terms. You don't program Watson, you work with Watson. And through your interactions with it, it learns, just like we do.
Ja, die lernen. Ja, es sind Selbstlernende, das kann man vielleicht noch dazu sagen. Selbstverständlich steht im Zusammenhang mit dem Begriff kognitiv auch der Umstand, dass diese Systeme und auch die Komponenten lernen. Und damit wir zum Beispiel, wenn es darum geht, einem solchen System Inhalte beizubringen, längst an dem Punkt sind, wo wir nur noch ein Drittel des gesamten Kontexts interpretieren helfen, damit das System beginnt zu lernen und dann große Teile dessen, was außerdem noch erfasst werden muss, vom System autark erlernt werden.
Are you interested in talking about how I express and understand emotions? I can express emotions with my voice, gestures, and talent, as well as the colorful lights in my eyes and on my shoulders. As you can see, I'm a humanoid robot created by Aldebaran. I'm a sophisticated combination of hardware and software designed to interact with humans and bring them joy.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Wir sind nicht dabei, uns in irgendeiner Form selber abzuschaffen. Im Gegenteil, wir heben eigentlich nur den Level, auf dem wir unsere eigene Kreativität zum Einsatz bringen, an. Und das halte ich für ein extremes Privileg.
In the future, algorithms and robots will be able to carry out nearly every routine task previously performed by humans. millions of jobs will vanish. These new technologies do provide economic growth, but not much in the way of jobs. And that could endanger capitalism itself. Who will be able to purchase all the nice things mass-produced every day when there are not enough people who can pay for them with their wages? Are we all passengers on the plane whose navigation system is broken? Are we still in control of the system? Or is it controlling us? In financial markets, algorithms have long since been running the show. Computers interact with other computers in fractions of a second, without any human input.
In this room, that's what we do here. We have an on-off switch, right? There's really no human intervention. I really don't believe in leaving the room and letting something trade unattended. It's about being there with the creation that you've worked on. Even if I don't know, you don't control it, but you watch it. Is it doing everything that you designed it to do? We hire scientists, technologists, and lawyers. We don't hire MBAs, we don't hire economists. So I'm gonna have to say there's really not much of a connection. I mean, if there was a strong connection between the two, you'd think that firms in my space would have need for, people with that kind of, economic background. There are many mathematical models that come out of fields such as horse betting that are used in our business as kind of fundamental pieces of algorithmic trading. We somehow project in our capitalist society this idea that this is a safe environment for people to build up their retirement on. It's actually a hyper-competitive environment, and depending on the product, there's sometimes I feel safer going into a casino than trading certain products in our space. I mean, it is a very different world than the way it's advertised to the general public.
Financial markets are out of control and no longer have any connections to reality. While algorithms and robots produce growth, they only provide work and prosperity for a few. And it's this growth that's destroying our future on the planet. The signs that something has gone wrong with our system have become impossible to overlook. So why do we consistently ignore them?
This is for TV. The network puts all this stuff together for me, right? I'm telling you, I'm dressing a lot better now than I was before I did television, because they even hire you a stylist. You know what I mean? You guys look like shit, so you obviously don't know what I'm talking about, but, this is some really nice clothing. All right, come on in.
The most powerful name in financial television, Wall Street Week, is back.
You have some news? Skybridge actually purchased the rights to Wall Street Week.
Skybridge Capital and its managing partner, Anthony Scaramucci, are reviving the iconic Wall Street Week program. It's a show about money, developed by people who work in money.
I view myself as a capital artist, okay? This company that I've created is my canvas. I know you guys in the media don't like capitalism, but someone's had to pay for the camera and the microphone. So, I mean, at the end of the day, the capitalist system is the only system that we've been able to design that works. Let's talk about growth, okay? There is a perception right now in these elitist academic salons, okay, that we're not gonna grow anymore. Well, that's just flat out wrong. If you study 5,500 years of human history, we know that human beings are designed to have great intellectual curiosity and to innovate. There are so many things that we're gonna do over the next 50 years that's gonna shock everybody in terms of our capability. We're gonna pull asteroids down from the asteroid belt that are loaded with platinum. That will probably be where the first trillionaire comes from. We're gonna unlock the ability to stop aging or to destroy cancerous cells in our bodies. All of this innovation is ahead of us, and there's a tremendous opportunity for growth. You're gonna grow as long as you get the tax policy and you get the economic regulations right, and you create the incentive to grow, and you send a message from Washington that we're open for business. You wanna see 3% growth, 4% growth, you gotta change the academic view of this stuff and talk to real-time practitioners that understand how to grow businesses and create innovation in the economy. There will always be growth on the planet. There will always be a jagged line upward for human beings because that's been the case for 5,500 years. And as long as we don't blow each other up with nuclear weapons, it will be the case for the next 5,500 years.
There's a sense of desperation to this strategy. There's a sense of having, for a decade or so recognized there might be some limits to our ability to continually grow this system. And now, we're tired of that idea. We don't want to be so realistic in the world. We would much rather have, a total fantasy for our guiding star. We would like to have this vision that, no, we don't have to think about curtailing growth. We have to think about making growth even stronger. We have to go harder for it. We have to make America great again. We can all be billionaires. We can all have property empires. And of course it's an illusion. And it goes back to exactly that same simple, basic fact. We live on a finite planet. There isn't the space for the dream of this reinvigorated growth fetish.
This is a round trip for Donald Trump. The next time he'll be going the opposite direction.
We live in extraordinary times. Our world is becoming increasingly complex, and many are disappointed to find that they are worse off than they used to be. But instead of doubting the economic system, they turn to those who have profited from it the most. Those who continually promise new growth. For these empty promises, more and more people are apparently willing to sacrifice democracy, peace, and their environment. Capitalism has reached a new level of escalation, but it's no longer suited to the world we live in. Its end is closer than we think. Are you an optimistic or a pessimistic person?
I don't know. I don't know that I've ever reflected on it that way. You can't do this to me at this point in an interview. Am I an optimist? Yes. Optimism is an act of will. Optimism is what a football team has to hold to the very last minute, even if it's a goal behind, if it wants to win. And I think Gramsci once said it's pessimism of the intellect, it's optimism of the will, and this is not just a snappy thing to say. It's actually the most constructive thing to say. We gain nothing really from pessimism, and we gain everything from being optimistic about the future.